Ndewo nwoke Igbo nwanyị Igbo ekene nwoke ekene nwanyị. And welcome back to my channel. If today is your first time, then you're in for a treat, because every work I put out is dedicated at trying to uplift the Igbo consciousness in relative to our indigenous culture, our indigenous customs, our indigenous rituals and practices. Now, things that our ancestors practiced, things that they did back in the day that were demonized and made us to turn away from it. And I want our people to be able to understand them from an ancestral perspective, not from a colonial religious perspective, but from an indigenous ancestral perspective. Now, this is the essence of my page. This is the essence of every single work that I put out here. Now, for today, I want to look at the Igbo concept of spiritual spouse. Mmiri, Nwunye Mmiri, this particular concept. Now, I would first of all, because when you ask people, what does this concept mean? It depends on who you're asking. If you're asking a traditionalist would give you an answer that is far-fetched from how a Christian or how a pastor or how a religious folk would basically interpret this concept. Now, I was trying to look at other works that have been put out there by anybody. Now, I found one that was written by a Christian, and I'm going to read it out, debunk some of what he wrote, and also give you an indigenous Igbo interpretation of this concept. Now, I also have listed some pointers that I'm going to be taking notes, such as the Igbo traditional worldview of this concept of a spiritual spouse. Then, how do one get a spiritual spouse? Because this Christian author here gave a lot of wrong information that our ancestors were not even privy to, because some of the information he put out here are things that we are just seeing in recent time. But this concept of spiritual spouse has been existing from time immemorial, and not just within the Igbo context. It is a predominant concept in Africa. So it is not just Igbo, but odinaani. We still have other places where they have the expression of this concept. They have they have different names for it. We could call it the or Nwunye Mmiri. But other culture, other people, they have how they regard and how they have a particular name, but it exists. Now, I'm also going to talk about how in Igbo, how do we handle this concept of Mmiri, Nwunye Mmiri? How do we handle it? Because how we handle it indigenously is also different from how religious people, Christians, handle it. Now, it will now make you to wonder, was it that our ancestors tolerated it? How did they just live with it, or it was not really a problem for them? That the white man had to come and teach our ancestors and teach us how we should handle interactions with this concept. So you now see that in Igbo, we have our own way of handling this concept. And I'm going to be talking about how our ancestors handled it. Now, I'm also going to talk about who should raise an altar for his or her spirit spouse. Now, because of the enlightenment awakening that most of us are having today, many people are reverting back to their indigenous belief system, and we see a lot of mistakes and what people do that our ancestors never sanctioned, and they did not really interact or handle issues relating to spiritual spouse in this certain manner. So I'm going to be talking about who should raise an altar and who should not raise an altar for a spiritual spouse. And I'm also going to conclude with benefits of being in an alignment with a spiritual spouse. It is not much. It is part of our everyday today activity. Now, before I commence with what I have from talking about Mmiri from an Igbo perspective, let's look at how a Christian would interpret this concept. Because I said earlier that the concept of Mmiri and Nwunye Mmiri, it depends on whom you're asking. Who are you asking? If a foreigner comes into our environment and asks a religious person, the person is going to give what he or she does not know. We'll give an interpretation. And a traditionalist would also give his or her interpretation of what this concept is. Now, the question is, who should we believe? Now, you should basically look at people that actually know what spiritual spouse is before you now divert into looking at people that just see it as something that is utterly different. Now, from a Christian perspective, now he said here that spiritual spouse is a deep spiritual issue that have kept millions away or awake. Now, he also said here that spiritual spouse are specifically commissioned by Satan to molest, trouble, and to destroy good and godly homes and relationships and their life in general. He said that spiritual spouse are spiritual enemies living and sleeping with people. They are very stubborn, they are aggressive, they are dangerous, and they are terrible enemies with killer motives. They want to kill your joy, they want to kill your peace, they want to kill your health, they want to kill your virtue, and they want to kill your marriage. Oftentimes, they do not need permission as they violate the rights of their victims, molest their victims with sex dreams. They are desperate and wicked spirits. Now, he now said that they can enter and start manifesting in one's life through means which includes immorality, pornography, spirit wife or spirit husbands can be inherited, evil dedication of an individual, underwear manipulations, and through tattooing and incisions. Now, the question we should ask ourselves here is that before our ancestors, before we know anything about pornography, didn't our ancestors had interactions with spiritual spouse? Before with the introduction of immorality, because our indigenous society was devoid of anything immoral. We saw people as people that obey the laws of God and nature. So immorality was not immorality. It's more or less a Christian word. It's more or less something that our society began to experience with the overpopulation and the influence of Christianity and our colonizers. So this is something our society began to experience more often than it was back in the day. But so if this author now decides to suggest that people get this spiritual spouse due to their immorality, it becomes far-fetched, because this is not what is predominant in our indigenous society, and yet we had the concept, yet we had an experience and interaction with this spiritual spouse. Now, he now talked about spirit's wife or husband can be inherited in what form or way. Evil dedication to an individual. You need begin to wonder, where do they get these informations from? Evil dedications to what? Our ancestors never perceived the performance of Nwunye Mmiri, the performance of having an ancestral deity in our lineage as evil. So this becomes presumptuous for these Christian folks. Now, through underwear manipulations, tattooings, and incisions, we had this practice of iteuli. Now, would we now say that it is people that had this practice of iteuli that all of a sudden they began to now have experiences and interaction with a spiritual spouse? Now, this author now gave ways, okay, so there are signs that you have a spiritual spouse. Talked about sexual relationships in dreams, hatred of marriage, being jilted by a serious partner, missing one's menstrual period in the dream, pregnancy in the dream. So he said so many things that are far-fetched. Dream marriages, constant wet dreams, late marriage or no marriage at all. So he gave these things and listed them as signs that you have a spiritual spouse, which means there is something that is fundamentally wrong with you that needs to be interceded or that you need to pay attention to. Now he gave prayer points. My body is the temple of God, therefore no spirits can enter and control over me. Spirit spouse and spirit wife, release me in the name of Jesus. Every spirit husband, I divorce you in the name of Jesus. And it goes on and goes on and goes on and goes on. So this is a Christian understanding of what spiritual spouse is. Now, what is the indigenous the traditional interpretation of spiritual spouse as in the Igbo. Now, our understanding, the Igbo traditional worldview of the spiritual spouse, it comes from an understanding that this spiritual spouse is part and parcel of an individual's generic cosmic force. We call it Ezumezu, or the totality of one spiritual cosmic force, or ihe so mmadu wee bịa ụwa. Ife so mmadu wee bịa ụwa. And what are those things that our ancestors regard as ihe so mmadu wee bịa ụwa? We have the concept of chi, the driving force of an individual. We have the concept of agwo, the creative ability of an individual. We now have the concept of ndotu. Individuals, you share a soul tie or your soul group. We now have the concept of indichie, umwada. These are your ancestors. Now, spiritual spouse, odinaani or Nwunye Mmiri, or wherever element it's coming from, it's part and parcel of your cosmic force. Which means that this interaction began way before you reincarnated. Now, this is where our ancestors, because we believe that before reincarnation, before Mother Abiowa, life or existence or consciousness has begun to exist way before then, before we materialize into this awolo, this physical cloth awolo ayi now. Now, what it means here, these are mythology, these are beliefs, these are perspective. But when we now look at this concept of spiritual spouse, where is it coming from? From our ancestral indigenous Igbo perspective, it is coming from the belief that we say that there is a totality of spirit, totality of energy, totality of more that accompanies a person to this reincarnation. So because our ancestors believe that there is a totality of spirit, Ezumezu, that comes with you to this world to aid you in directing you, in guiding you, and helping you to achieve and to reach your cosmic purpose, it becomes a class of spirit. Each of the aspects of this totality of more, they are there to perform specific functions and specific things for you in your life. Now, your chi drives you, predestines you, has brought out a laid down foundation how your chi wants you to path, your chi wants you to follow, and it's going to end up in helping you to achieve your cosmic purpose. So when it comes to everything that happens to be about you, your chi is there directing you, your chi is there guiding you in that aspect. Now, your awo, when I talk about awo, we're talking about the creative force, the creative ability of an individual. So each of these aspects of Ezumezu, the totality of spirit, they have their function, they have where they attach themselves, they have where they are, what they are supposed to do for you, because they are like servant spirits. They exist to serve you, they exist to help you, they exist to guide you. But when a Christian is looking at this concept, it is regarding spiritual spouse as an enemy spirit. But in our indigenous Igbo society, we've never regarded this concept as an enemy entity spirit. And because we have laid down principles and processes, rituals, how we use those rituals, processes we use in interacting with this spirit, we have different ways of relating and interacting with this cosmic aspect. Now, Mmiri or Nwunye Mmiri, spiritual spouse, it is not something everybody has. And some people could have it, but it could be dormant in their life. But some people could have it and it's going to be pronounced. Now, what we are now having are some of the signs and symptoms and things that the man listed were in some way correct, but the context in which he was presenting those facts were wrong. In our ancient society, once they give birth to a child, the next thing that the parents are going to do is begin to perform different kinds of traditional rituals and practices. Awayago. Ewago is a way of, confirming and welcoming the reincarnating spirit of an individual. And they now have different rituals in which they used to acknowledge and welcome the ancestor that is coming back to this reincarnation to probably finish up what he or she did not finish up in his previous incarnation. So, Awayago. When the child gets to a certain age, they perform the ritual of Erao. When a woman or a man gets to a point whereby he needs to acknowledge the spirit of a Mmiri or spiritual spouse, he or she would perform the necessary rites and rituals that are doing what? That are acknowledging the essence of that spirit. So these concepts are deep rooted in our cosmology as in the Igbo. And we do not see them as enemy spirits, and we do not see them as entities that we want to pray against or to fight against. We acknowledge them and we accept them as part of our Ezumezu, the totality of spirits, or the totality of accompanying spirit. The next question here is, how can one get this spiritual spouse? Now, like him, the author, the question author mentioned, he said pornography, incisions and tattooing, underwear manipulations. He gave so many excuses or so many things that are not even far-fetched in our cosmology or traditions. Because some of those things are things we just began to experience, like pornography. So he's trying to tell me that those ancestors that had issues and that even figured out how to acknowledge and experience and interact with this spiritual spouse, that somehow they were watching pornography back in the day. No. Now, how can one get a spiritual spouse? A spiritual spouse is fundamental, like I said, it is part and parcel of your Ezumezu, the totality of your spirit, the totality of Ihesogi Webiowa. It is you and you are them. It comes with you, even before, because we believe in life or consciousness before life, before we now wear this physical award, which now answers the question that you don't get it from anywhere. It is part and parcel of Ihesogi Webiowa. You cannot get them from pornography. You cannot get it from immorality. You cannot get it from underwear manipulation, tattooing, or incisions, or whatever reasons Christians give today. And when they are now telling you, oh, this is, if you do this, or you're getting it from a dedicated altar, or you're getting it. No! You cannot inherit it. Now, when we say Ife so mother whether now we have different entity spirits, but Mmiri or spiritual spouse cannot be inherited. It cannot be inherited. Or maybe when they will talk about inheritance in that sense, are they trying to say that because when we now look at Mmiri Mmadu so webiowa, Mmiri wa mother, this particular Mmiri, it could come from your mother's side or your father's side. So let's say your father is from Enugu State and your mother is from Anambra State. Your Mmiri or Mmirichi would either come from Enugu or it would either come from Anambra, and your spiritual spouse must definitely come from either of those elements, or either of those from those states. So if this inheritance is coming from that particular definition, okay, then that makes sense. But predominantly, how can a person get a spiritual spouse? It comes from birth. Osina. Even before you're giving birth to it is an accompanying spirit, also which means that before you reincarnate, you have been having some sort of an experience, an unconscious experience with a spiritual spouse. So you don't get them by your activities here. It is predominantly with you. Now, it could be dormant or it could be visible. If it is dormant, then you can live out your life without having an experience. But if it wants to be active for one or two reasons, it is going to manifest itself. Then this is when we now go through the process of Ewafa in order to find out what this entity spirit is looking for or is seeking for. Then we use rituals, lay down rituals on how we've been taught to handle such issues, and we handle it in the right traditional context. Now, the next question that we have here is, who should raise an altar for his or her spiritual spouse? Onyega adomwo osino eba bebe di mirim no, eba bebe nwunye mirim no. Who has the right to do it? Not every individual has the right to do it. This particular idotu Dimiri or Nwunye Mmiri, spiritual spouse, it is reserved for a particular set of people. The non-initiates are not expected, the non-initiates are not expected to have an altar that they have raised and channeled the energy of their spiritual spouse to it. So it is only reserved to the initiates, the divya, the shamans. These are the only people that have the right to have an altar in their home that is dedicated to the acknowledgement of this entity spirit. And why is it? Now, the spiritual spouse is a widespread element of shamanism. So when I'm talking about the divya and they're talking about spiritual spouse, they're the people that are making that, the people that need it more. And why do they need it? It becomes part of their helping spirit. It becomes part of their Ezumezu or Mmadu that assists them in whatever thing that they are doing for their people that come to them to help, to heal them, to divine for them, to do one or two things for them. So their spiritual spouse becomes an integral element that aid them in helping them to survive, that helps them, that makes them who they are as a divya, as a servant to nature. Their spiritual spouse helps them. So these are the people that are going to now have a consecrated altar and says, and they now have a separate day, one of the market days, where they don't have intimate relations with their wife or with their partners. They dedicate that day for their spiritual spouse. Now, some of them use those rooms as a place for meditation. They go into that room and they stay there to meditate, to consult with their spiritual spouse in matters relating to their work. Asole yanso. They are going to use that particular day to do what you call a son, so So these are the people that have the right. Now, for a person that is not a shaman or a divya, what you can do is, when there is an issue of spiritual spouse, the only thing you can do is to perform the necessary rites and rituals. And you go your way. You don't have to have an altar and dedicate it to your spiritual spouse. It is not your jurisdiction. Now, what are the ways by which you can handle issues? Now, these things are reserved for the divya. Now, depending on what Afa says, when they go through the divination process to find out, okay, this is what is happening, this is why it is happening, this is what you should do to basically be in an alignment with your spiritual spouse, and this is what you should avoid. Sorry. Maybe you did something you're not supposed to do. You ate something you're not supposed to do. You got involved in an activity. Your Ezumezu, your Okeafor, your spiritual spouse, what it abhors. It is going to kind of give a negative reaction that is going to make you to revert and fix your life and fix what is happening to you. Now, we have a particular traditional ritual that we perform. We call it Nwunye Mmiri. It is a payment of some sort of a dowry to the spiritual spouse of your wife. It is done by a man for his wife. So before a man marries, you're going to go and pay. The same way we do imego, you do what you call Mmiri. You do it as a way of acknowledging as a way of saying, okay, look at these spirit entities. You are guiding my wife. I'm acknowledging you. I'm about to marry her, but I'm not taking her away from you. We can all be together. You aid, and we're going to acknowledge you as we should, while you help us in our daily activity, help us in the terms of fertility, help us in the terms of getting what we want. That's it. We don't go ahead and start screaming and shouting Holy Ghost fire and the rest of how Christians kind of oversimplify everything, not over exaggerate something that is as simple as Nwunye Mmiri or performing some sort of a traditional ritual based on how our ancestors did it way back in the day. Now, finally, what are the benefits of being in alignment with one's spiritual spouse? Now, to not disappoint, especially people that will be thinking to hear, oh, your finances are going to be in order, you're going to have like a financial liberation. That's not what I'm going to say, and I'm not even going to go there. One of the benefits of being in alignment with your spiritual spouse, it is more or less the same thing about being in an alignment with your chi and your Ezumezu. Because they are there to work for you. They are servants of nature. They are dedicated at helping you to have a progressive, they're there to help you to have a more balanced life. They are there to make sure that you live the life you are supposed to live. And at the end of the day, you are going to achieve your cosmic purpose. What you're supposed to do, the experiences that you're supposed to learn, whether good and bad. So your spirit spouse as an individual, if you're a Dibia, it is going to help you in your work. Because what a Dibia has a cosmic call to do something, to serve people, to serve nature, to aid them, to procure herbs for them, to recommend herbs for them, and to help them in whatever calamity or in whatever situation, spiritual and physical, in whatever where it's coming from. Now, Dibias, that's their EU, that's their own cosmic contract that they have attached themselves in and they are trying to solve. Now, for you, who is a non-initiate, you're there. So when you align with these cosmic forces, they are there to help you in achieving it, to get into that destination that you are supposed to get to. And when you've gotten to that destination, you will now have a more fulfilled life. This is why when we go back to the villages, we see some of these traditional worshippers. They don't have the biggest mansions. They don't have the luxurious cars. But they live a very decent life. They live a good life. They live a humble life. They live a content life. Their life and where they are at that point, it's very contented. Much better than many of us that have riches, cars, and wealth. So we will now ask ourselves, oh, this person is a traditionalist. Now, because of how things have been structured, we now only decide that we now only say that, oh, because you don't have money, because you don't have, we cannot count what you have in terms of material things. We think you're not happy, or we think you're not contented, or we think, oh, there is something. This is why, the church or pastors will now say, oh, because you're not serving God, that's why your life is the way it is. But in reality, these traditional worshippers or these traditional practitioners, they are content, which becomes one of the key principles of what our traditional practice and our traditional philosophies, what they teach us. It teaches you contentment. Because you are now self-aware that it is not everybody that is supposed to live the luxurious life. It is not everybody that is supposed to, be Dangote, to be in whatever position. But in that little corner that you're there to shine a light to the world. You're there to be contented. You're there to make your life is fulfilled and happy and rich with what you have. So our spirituality eliminates some sort of being contentious. You're not happy, you're occult, you're always looking for the next thing, even without even accepting or being happy with the little ones that you get. So being in alignment with spiritual spouse and Ezumezu, it's a life of contentment. And from there, the essence of you being in alignment with them is that it is going to help you to achieve your cosmic purpose. It is there to make you happy. And one thing there is that if it is about, because they will tell you that a hungry man is an angry man. That's it. What you're going to eat, the food that you're going to eat, you would always see. You would not go a day without eating. You can never starve. Now, what we now ask is to now be in a position where we now have cars and houses and all those things, but those things are secondary. What they serve for you is that the primary thing they are trying to do is to make your life to be rich, to be fulfilled, to be content. Now, this is what the Igbo concept of spiritual spouse is. Now, I was able to share information from the indigenous Igbo understanding of this concept and the Christian understanding of this concept. Now, it is your own job to listen to the both of them and choose what works for you. But if you're an Igbo person, I'm going to encourage you to look at this concept from our traditional point of view and not from a Christian point of view. Now, until next time, don't forget to subscribe to this channel and let me hear your thoughts in the comment section. So until next time,
Wambe isinikba tonye Asmani nyakebe di chebeni Odikan sinakpatameni Asmani nyadubeni chebeni Odikan sinakpatameni Akweni gabu isi oche Akweni gabu isi oche Eni naga na isogi nazu Eni naga na isogi nazu Asimani nyadu beni chebeni Odikan sinakpatameni Asimani nyakebeni chebeni Odikan sinakpatameni Akweni gabu isi oche Akweni gabu isi oche Enina Gana isogi nazu wo 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 wo